Thank you very much, Elaine. And our third speaker is Andrew. Anybody who's ever looked at the discussion forum will know Andrew, and they'll know him from his warmth, his wit and his wisdom, which I'm sure will be in the talk that he now gives us. Thank you.
This is like being at an AA meeting. My name is Andrew and I've got Keratoconus, and you're all supposed to say hello, Andrew. My keratoconus first developed when I was a student at university, and I went to an optometrist, with respect to the phalanx of optometrists sitting in front of me, and the guy said to me, you've got an eye condition and there's nothing that can be done about it, so go away and get used to it. And I kind of took that at face value. And for years I did nothing about it. And eventually in Aberdeen I had gone to another optometrist. Here we are, redemption coming your way. I went to another optometrist who said, you've got a condition called keratoconus, go to your doctor. So I went to my doctor and he asked me what I'd been told, and I said, I think he said I had a condition called keratoconus. And he said, well, I'll send you to the eye infirmary. In those days, the eye infirmary outpatients in Aberdeen was at Woolman Hill. So off I went to Woolman Hill, and the surgeon said to me, you've got keratoconus, but don't worry about it. We'll punch out your discs and give you new ones from a dead person. At that moment, I panicked. Suddenly, I'd gone from being short-sighted to having a condition that was going to need me to get new discs from a dead person. And I didn't cope at all well with that news. I guess that my response to panic, you can't stay in a state of panic forever, although C.S. Lewis, the theologian, describes bereavement as being very similar to panic. He said, he would pace about and be unable to fix his mind on things. He would go into the kitchen and be unable to remember if he was going to have a cup of coffee or turn on the washing machine. And that's what it's like. It's that great mixture of feeling that you need to be busy but not really knowing quite what to do. Panic is paralyzing. It's debilitating. So my coping strategy for panic was to go into a state of denial. I went about as if there was nothing wrong with me. I couldn't recognize people's faces. In fact, people appeared not to have faces. So I smiled at everybody. And I think probably developed a reputation. People seeing this rather short-sighted looking idiot leering at their children. And actually, in my line of business, it doesn't do not to smile at everybody, because if you don't smile at people who think you ought to, then they do talk. So my next coping strategy, having given up denial, was to be angry. And I was angry with practically everybody and everything, but I was particularly angry with myself, because I knew I wasn't coping at all well with the diagnosis of keratoconus. I had already by this time been to see a contact lens specialist in Aberdeen, like the situation in Edinburgh. In Aberdeen in those days, I don't know about now, but in those days it was somebody in the private sector who looked after contact lenses for keratoconus. And he was great. I tell you two things about him for which I'm still grateful. One, he never put a lens in my eye. Before a lens went into my eye, I had to learn to do it. And two, he never let me use a mirror. So from day one, I was putting the lens in myself and taking it out myself. And from day one, I was doing that without a mirror. So I don't need mirrors to manipulate lenses. But then there came the next stage of this process, and this is kind of me being reflective, and it might be I've got these slightly out of order, but I think it's pretty fair to say that the next stage was one of just a deep sadness. I knew that my vision, my eyesight was going to get worse. There were things that I'd come to take for granted that I was not going to be able to do. I had to get used, I thought, to just not recognising people. I had to get used to not being able to drive. I'd given up driving at that time. And I had to get used to the prospect of having my discs punched out and new ones from a dead person being sewn in. And all of those things just seemed extraordinarily sad to me. And having gone through that stage of sorrow, of bereavement, of sadness, I kind of emerged into a state of acceptance that Imogen spoke of so helpfully and positively. We all know this situation. When we have contact lenses, when they're in, as Imogen has rightly said, we have extraordinarily good sight. And when they're out, we don't have very much sight at all. I got used to being blind part-time. When my lenses were in, I had reasonably good vision. This little sign, which is taken from an American website called KC Vision, is the first stage of a simulation. I'll show you the second stage in a moment. Problem with having my lenses in, I never had comfortable lens wear. The lenses I got in Aberdeen were always uncomfortable. When I came down to Glasgow, I went to the Tennant Institute, which was then at the Eye Infirmary on Sucky Hall Street. Subsequently, that caught fire and the Health Board sold it for redevelopment, and the Tennant Institute was moved up to Gartnavel. And although they did everything in their power to give me comfortable lens wear, actually my lenses were never comfortable, although they did give me reasonably good sight so that I could see and read that sign. That's at about 3 feet distance from the sign, and that's at the same distance without my lenses in. Lenses out, I was already functionally blind, and most of you, well, many of you, will know that experience too. I had extremely poor sight, and my eyes were sore. They were uncomfortable with lenses in, and they were sore with lenses out. I couldn't go out into the sunshine without sunglasses. Actually, I developed a penchant for wearing rather stylish hats, which I recommend. I didn't bring one with me today because I was afraid somebody might steal it, but it's not very far away. A broad-brimmed hat and sunglasses mean that you don't have to worry too much about sunshine. But then, of course, time went by and I got to the point where I became contact lens intolerant. That didn't happen gradually. That happened suddenly. I went from being able to wear lenses just to being unable to get them in. I think now, looking back, and really this is thanks to Graham that I've come to this view, I think now that I probably had developed quite severe dry eye, and that's why I became contact lens intolerant. Whether that was the case or not, I was now blind full time, and the sorts of things that I should have been getting ready for found me completely unprepared. I should, for example, have been getting ready to know which bus I would need to get if I wanted to go somewhere. But I didn't bother my shirt tail. The other thing I ought to have done is develop a strategy to work out if it was a bus that was coming towards me or a lorry. More than once, I put out my hand and a chap would pull up beside me and he would say, I'm a lorry, or I'm a petrol tanker. Or the other thing, of course, is they would say, no, I don't go your way, it's a number 72 you want. Now, I couldn't see what number he had in the front of his bus, so I don't know how I was going to see a 72. But that said, I benefited just enormously when I couldn't see from the kindness of other people. I was coming down, I live in a very hilly town. I was coming down the hill from where I live to go to church one Sunday evening. And as I came down the hill, there was a bar at the bottom that's still there, which is populated by supporters of Glasgow Celtic Football Club. And they all spilled out onto the pavement in a state of jollity because their team had just won. They were so happy, in fact, that every single one of them, they seemed to have formed a queue, wanted to give me a hug. And then they wanted to know where I was going. And when they found out I was going to the Protestant church down the road, they all offered to take me, and they did. There I was, the only sober man the only sober Rangers supporter in a collection of drunken Celtic supporters who conveyed me safely across the road and along to where I wanted to go. It is extraordinary how good and generous and kind people are if you give them a chance. Before I had lost my sight, I'd found already the old forum. I'm not even sure it's properly called a forum. It was a website, and you could post comments to it, but there was no way, I think, in those days of separating comments by topic. It really down to John that the new forum has become such a valuable tool for many of us. Being able to contact other people with keratoconus was for me the one most significant element in what has become for me a very positive coping strategy. Being able to post my experience and to read the experience of others on the Keratoconus forum has meant that I haven't felt isolated. Alongside that, I also want to pay tribute to the optometry department at Gartnavel. I wear glasses. My glasses are corrected for my right eye, and I have a contact lens, a rigid gas permeable, that I wear on my left eye. I don't have my lens in just now, so if I do that, I can't see you. But because I have this mixture of correction, I have reasonably good vision. Just now, I think I'm legal to drive, and if I've got both eyes working at the same time, I can also tell how far away the step is. I'm a bit clumsy when I have only one eye in operation, but people who know that I have keratoconus expect me to be clumsy and are still generous. People who don't know just get soaked. The optometrists at Gartnavel were super, and when I became contact lens intolerant, that same day they got me into an ophthalmology clinic. That same day I was registered blind and I was put on the list for a transplant. And I'm just so impressed by the way in which everything fell neatly into place. The doctor who was going to do my transplant even spoke to me about when would be the best time for it to happen. As things worked out, my first transplant was at the worst possible time of year. It was just before Christmas. But since I'd been saying that every other time he offered me was even worse, he reckoned that some time off over Christmas wouldn't do me any harm. And I think he was right. Also, having lost my sight, I found myself in need of special equipment to be able to continue to work. The Royal National Institute for the Blind gave me a workplace assessment. The social work department came along and made sure I got all sorts of kit. Job Centre Plus, together with my employer, made sure that my computer equipment was able to cope with my inability to see. I often now work at my computer with the screen turned off. Because actually for some things that I do commonly, it's much easier for me not to look at the screen. So the computer just talks to me and I respond to it. I sometimes respond to it by speaking, but then I realise it's not paying any attention. I push some buttons and it does what I need it to do. Keratoconus has been an interesting journey for me. I decided when I was first offered a graft that I wasn't going to accept it. I asked the surgeon who offered me the graft what could possibly go wrong, and he gave me a list of things that could go wrong, and I said, well, not on your life. It did seem to me that the potential benefit, which was great, was really no better than I was getting already with lenses. The risks were also unacceptable. I decided that I would wait until I had nothing to lose before I let them approach any of my eyes with a knife. Having decided that, when the time came that I thought I didn't have anything left to lose, the decision was a no-brainer. I agreed to have the graft. And I'm so grateful to the people whose work and whose generosity have meant that I am now able to see again. I have, as you can see, good corrected vision with glasses in my right eye, good corrected vision with a contact lens in my left eye, and there isn't a day goes by when I'm not grateful for the skill of surgeons and for the generosity of 2 bereaved families. And this is really where I think we are at our most blessed. It's because 2 families who were told in a moment of extreme distress that somebody they loved had died. And in the same breath, they were asked if they could use the loved person's parts, in some cases to save lives, in some cases to restore sight. And they said yes. And when I got to Gartnavel, they gave me a huge box with blue writing, large blue friendly letters, and it said human tissue for transplant. And they gave me this in the ward. And I sat on this ridiculous trolley with one of those hideously absurd gowns on. You know the ones... See, Claire reckons that this is just ordinary, but for the rest of us in the world, this is quite extraordinary. And they also then put one of these blankets that's full of holes over you. And they're wheeling you on down, and you've got this box. And everybody sees you, and they look at the box, and they wonder if you're having a heart transplant. And they get you to the theatre, and you still have the box when you go under the anaesthetic. Then they must take the box away and do something with it. But it's a huge box, and it's only a tiny little bit of tissue, a cornea, because of the generosity of 2 families whose loved ones' parts were used in more than one operation. I am, with the assistance of specs and lenses, able to see, and I have more or less full-time sight. This is a view that I pictured on Sunday. It's of Loch Lomond in the mist, and you can see, living in this part of Scotland, what a gift it is to be able to see full-time.
Well, the talk you gave was exactly what I was expecting, so thank you very much indeed. I think finally what I'd like is to have a panel of the last 3 speakers, so that people can ask them questions. So if all 3 of you would like to come back to the top table.
Can I just say a couple of things about, where they come up? Just
surely.
Just a couple of things that come out of, well, really what Imogen was saying. Contrast sensitivity, it's because you're describing grey environments being particularly difficult, and when you have anything that disturbs the surface, the anterior surface of the cornea, it causes sensitivity to greyness to diminish far more. So if I showed you that slide, very clear black on white, you'd have absolutely no problem. So when you got your eyes checked and anybody tests you, you see fine. But if that was translated to looking at a grey thing, so if you put up your screensaver thing that has the text on it for the Keratoconus Society, it's a grey image, and that is hugely more difficult for you to see. And I mean, the first time I came across this, I found it quite a helpful thing for folks to understand that you may feel, why can I not cope when I go out to the car after a restaurant meal? Other folk walk there perfectly happily. I can get in the car and see fine, or I can walk around the streets and see fine, but I can't seem to navigate in this semi-twilight. Now, twilight is a particularly difficult time for you folks. So even just knowing that, I hope maybe that's something that's helpful. The other thing I was going to say to Imogen, I have quite a number of folks, and I mean, what Andrew's saying is absolutely right. You juggle. You've got a lens here, and you can take this out, put that spec in, do this, and you've got loads of ways. Because as a group, generally, you understand your condition really well, so you're really good at working at that. I've got quite a number of folks like you who then have a bandage lens, a set of one-day lenses that they keep at home. So when the lens becomes irritable, they just stick the bandage lens underneath, put their existing hard lens on, and they get their comfort back. But they're just for emergency use. So they've maybe got a box of 20 or 30 boxes, lenses, and they'll just stick them in on the bad days. And then they go back to their ordinary way of wearing. But it's just another thing that you, as a group, can think, I just buy a box of 30 one-day lenses, and it'll cost you 20 quid. And you just have them at home, and it can rescue you occasionally. So, some suggestions.